Hi, hello. I hope you're doing well. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to get right into it because we're going to be talking about the books that I read in June. In total this year, I've read 30 books, 10 of which I've read this past month, which basic math, a third of the reading that I've done this year I've completed in 1 month, which is kind of astounding. But also, like, some of these books are pretty small and some of them are pretty big. So let's just talk about it. The first one I didn't actually read in June, but I'm going to be mentioning it because it was part of the Queer Lit Readathon, which took place predominantly in June. But that's Don't Call Us Dead by Didnt Smith. So I finished this on the first day of the readathon, which was May 31st. And this is a poetry collection by Didnt Smith, who is a non-binary Black queer poet from Minnesota. And this collection deals with what it means to be Black and queer and what it means to be living with HIV. Okay, now the books that I actually read this month. We have Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe by Fanny Flagg. I'd seen the movie, wanted to read the book. This is about a middle-aged woman who visits her husband's mother in a nursing home but ends up befriending another woman who's there, and that woman is telling her stories about her youth and particularly two women who ran Whistle Stop Cafe in Alabama. And these two women, while it's never made explicit on page, it's assumed that they're in some kind of romantic relationship. They have a son together, and yeah, this wasn't the best book that I read, especially at the time that I was reading it, because it's kind of questionable in terms of how the author talks about and introduces Black characters. I found that all of the characters seemed to be playing to stereotypes and kind of were introduced and used to make the white characters seem like good white people. So that was an issue with it. There were other parts that I did like about the book. I think this was great in terms of a woman coming into herself and feeling and finding confidence a little bit later in life. I thought that was great to read about, but overall kind of disappointed. I then read Knit One Girl 2 by Shira Glassman. This is a novella that I read on my Kindle that's about a girl who's making yarn and dyeing yarn and looking for inspiration, and she finds it through these paintings and befriends the artist who made them, and romance is sparked. It was really cute and fun and sweet. I then started Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. This is a book that features 12 narratives, predominantly telling the story of Black women in Britain, but also there's a non-binary character. This book, I feel, offers so many different perspectives on living in Britain, being Black, being a woman, being queer, being non-binary, and does a good job of providing conflicting and different stories, so there isn't this one monolithic, like, here's the Black female experience in Britain. So I thought that was great. I enjoyed reading this. The style's really interesting. There are like no periods, or very few. Then a book that I started in May and then put down and then picked up again is The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. This is the story of twins in India who, when they were 10 or 11 or 12, around that age, were separated. One went to live with his father and one stayed and lived with her mother. And then different circumstances have brought them back together. And this talks about their youth in India and is probably my favorite book that I've read this year so far. I found the way that Arundhati Roy played with language was super interesting, by cutting up words and rearranging them and kind of using them in a really playful way. And this is something that I'm really glad that I read. I think right now, you know, I just graduated. I have a lot of time that I can invest in like reading and like really cherishing the reading process of a book like this. So I then read Freshwater by Ekweke Emezi. This is about a Nigerian child, Ada, who is born with god children inside of her, and the story is really about trauma and the traumatic events that happen to Ada as she's a child in Nigeria and then moves to the US to go to school. And it also features representation for fractured selves, or DID, dissociative identity disorder, even though that is not explicitly put out on the page. We see these selves emerge as Ada undergoes more traumatic events. Lots of trigger warnings for this book. I found the writing really impactful, and it was a book that I kind of wanted to reread immediately after finishing it, but it's such an emotional book that I think that would have been a lot. Then a book that I was surprised to finish was the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. I've been reading this physical book since 2016. This is the complete novels and stories of Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. So I've gone through most of it, but I just completed the collection of stories under the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, which I've been reading out loud for work and have really been enjoying. So I'm continuing on with The Return of Sherlock Holmes and hope I can finish it this summer, but I'm also not rushing. I then read The Madness Face by Andrea Gibson. This is a poetry collection I've had for too long. I've been wanting to read pretty much every summer, and I'm really glad I got around to it. This might be my new favorite poetry collection. I've always enjoyed Andrea Gibson's spoken word. They are a non-binary slam poet, spoken word poet. I've always enjoyed listening to their poetry, so reading it was also really great. This has themes of religion, of they talk a lot about their mother, about queerness, and living in a really conservative place. This also, I was writing down themes and like motifs throughout the collection. So there's like hands on hearts, snow angels, the moon, kites, instruments, guillotines, and water meeting the ocean. So I really enjoyed this. Then a book that I was reading with my grandpa. He and I have decided to read anti-racist books together so that we can hold each other accountable about learning more, and also so that we have someone else to talk to about it. And the one we started with was Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. This was written by Bryan Stevenson, who is a lawyer, activist, created the Equal Justice Initiative. Yes, the Equal Justice Initiative. And he writes about cases that he worked on, predominantly the case of Walter McMillan, who was wrongly accused and put on death row for a crime he didn't commit. This book also talks about the faults in our legal system, from trying children as adults and giving them adult sentences, to imprisoning disabled and mentally ill people whose disabilities and illnesses weren't accounted for in their trials. This was a really emotional read and impactful, and also it's written in a way that doesn't feel bogged down by legal or academic jargon. So there's a lot of like vulnerability that Stevenson shows in the book, which I just really enjoyed and appreciated, and thought was a great starting point. Then I read Jane Unlimited by Kristen Kishore. This is about Jane, whose aunt has recently passed away, but left her a message that if she's ever invited to her friend's like family island, that she should go. And so she ends up going to this island, and is faced with some choices, and these choices result in different outcomes. So this is a really interesting book that offers like the different outcomes for each choice that she chooses, or each like path she goes down. And I thought it was really interesting because like I think I had anticipated that each choice would like discount the others, but it doesn't. So this was really fun to read, made me think of Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier because it was in part inspired by it. Then I picked up The Avant-Gardes by Carly Usdin and Noah Hayes. This is about a basketball team at a arts college that is competing in the first like women's basketball league that they've formed. I don't know. This was fun. Our main character is reluctant to join and then is ultimately convinced, has a good time, and the like little romances were sweet. So this was a fun little graphic novel. The last book I have to talk about is The Half Has Never Been Told by Edward E. Baptist. This is a book that I've been reading all month, that I've been renting from, that I've been reading as an ebook from my alma mater's digital library. It is not necessarily a rewriting of history, but it tells the history of slavery that has often been written over and edited into being one that depicts slavery as something that was an antiquated or pre-modern system that didn't evolve, that wasn't as influential in the US economy as it really was. The Baptist uses personal narratives from enslaved people or the descendants of enslaved people to provide this accurate history of the way that slavery evolved and was a really modern system at the time that the entire country depended on and used for its own economic benefit and growth. This book is really dense. It's something that I've been taking notes on and then kind of trying to summarize as I go because it is like an academic text. At the same time, I think it's really, really good and really, really strong. The chapters are split up based on like body parts. So it starts with feet to talk about forced migration and innovations that made the transfer of human bodies easier. And then hands and arms and heads, and thinking about the enslaved body as the center for US economic growth, even though that part of the story has often been neglected and erased by white popular US historians. So that one was great. Those are the 10 books plus one that I read in June. I am kind of astounded that I've read this much, but not complaining. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Let me know what your favorite book that you read in June was, and I'll see you in another video.